So one of the things that you need to get this transmission out is this long extension. You could try to put a few together, but this is a long extension I got from Harbor Freight. It did pretty good. This allows you to lower the transmission and get those top bolts out of the starter and out of the top of the transmission. Today, we're going to put everything back in, or start putting the transmission back together. We're going to use that jack again to put it back. I'm going to use a new filter for the transmission. I'm going to put that, throw the old one out. This is the old filter. Have a new gasket for the pan. Got that all cleaned up, ready to go. I'll go ahead and put all that back together. I've already put it in, but I replaced this seal. I actually got this one from O'Reilly's. There's the part number for that. And the easiest way I found it is I actually looked up the number on the side of the seal. See if we can see it on here. Get it in the light. There it is right there. It's 96020-366. I was able to find that, and they actually got it overnight. None of the other auto parts stores had it. And so to get that out, I actually used a pair of channel locks. This pair wide open, and I was able to grab the edges and kind of wobble it out. And then put it back in. I used the end of this wooden hammer and kind of hammered this in gradually all the way around, lining up the little bolt holes. Put the seal in there. I was afraid in transit the seal has a damaged edge on it from the torque converter moving around a little bit, and so I was afraid to put that old seal back in. So now it has a new seal. So I'm going to finish this up. I'm going to put the seal on the transmission and get it strapped down to go back under the car. So I have the pan on, have my gasket here, my seal. I kind of put a little bit of oil on the seal here, make sure this was cleaned up real good on the torque converter. I'm going to try to support this torque converter and slide it in on the, without damaging the seal, and then rotate it to the right, and eventually you'll feel this click in, and it's got to go about an inch past this spot here to be in all the way in. What you don't want to do is have this sticking out at all, the torque converter sticking out, so that when you push this in, it would, when you pull this transmission up to the engine, it would damage the gears either in here or inside the torque converter. So I'm going to try to show how I'm doing this on video. nuts all the way in. When it drops in like that, then you're in. That's about how far we're in. Has to drop twice. I did put it in park to get that to finally go in, but I didn't put so much inward pressure on it when I was turning it to see if I could get it to slide in. Okay, so I have the transmission back on the jack stand, strapped down. I actually used another smaller strap because this is hard to undo when you get it up in the well where that transmission goes. But we have to jack the car up just high enough to get this through there, and it'll be in. Okay, so I have her back in. I'll get everything lined up and crank her back up and see how we can get this line back up. I may try to go ahead and put some of the bolts in the holes just so I don't have to feel my way through. I did put a little grease in each of those bolt holes to help line up, and also I put grease on the dowel pin for the starter. When I was taking it out, the starter had been stuck on the dowel pin, so hopefully that won't happen again. One of the things I do when I'm working on these vehicles is I put everything in plastic bags as they come off, so I know where they go back. Okay, so what I had to do was I jacked up the transmission, and then I made sure these lines were clear. I have my cables running over the top of the transmission like they should be. And this had a big gap at the bottom because basically this was flat. So with the engine tilted down, it just didn't match up. So what I had to do was I raised it up till the top of the transmission was aligned with the dowel pins here. The dowel pins are about right here. And there's a dowel pin here. Made sure this plate was in place on top of the dowel pins. And then I took my pry bar and I loosened the nuts, and I raised up the front of the transmission and to try to make it match with the engine. And so I adjusted the height until I had the transmission parallel with the engine, and then I pulled it in, and lo and behold, it lined right up on the dowel pins. I have the 2 bolts in that go with the dowel pins, and I have them tightened up by hand. And now I'm going to try to align the rest of the bolts. I think I'm going to do the starter next. The starter is up here in this area, and I've got to line it back up and get the bolts started on that. The bolts are in place. They're not in the starter, but they're sitting up there ready to be placed into the starter. The starter has a dowel pin to line up. It's kind of hard to see up in there, but the starter is right there. I'm gonna have to line it up to get it where it should be. There's the starter right there. Okay, there is a vacuum line up there on one side, and on the other where I have to put that canister back, but the starter may be the most difficult part, but we're going to see. But I am going to lower the transmission back down to give me more space. Okay, so now that I've got my transmission in place, the bolts lined up, all the bolts in the hole, I'm using this socket and ratchet extension, and you can see the bolts, the 2 larger bolts on the right. The starter bolts are on the left. I've got the transmission down about as low as I could get it, and then I'm going to go around and hand tighten these bolts and then try to torque them down by feel for the most part. So my initial tightening on the starter, which is up there, the starter didn't come on square, so I had to unloosen the bolts, go around and push the starter several times up on that dowel pin, and come around here to retighten the bolts. And that's what I want to do now, is retighten the bolts on the starter. Then I'm going to go back and hand tighten the rest of the bolts on the bell housing. Sorry I don't have the spec on that for torque, but I want to do those by hand. Okay, so lining the bolts up on the torque converter. I've got one started here. I used my magnet to put it in there. I tried to put this rag in there just in case the bolt fell through. Not sure if there's a way to get it out once if you accidentally drop it. I also have a ratchet on here with a 22mm socket on the harmonic balancer, rotating it counterclockwise to rotate the torque converter around to put in the bolts. My flywheel happened to be lined up pretty good because I didn't move it since I took the transmission off, so it's just a matter of spinning the torque converter here and using a pry bar to push it up against the flywheel. That should be torqued to 33 foot-pounds. So I'm going to move it around, put all 3 bolts in, torque it down, and move on to the next step. Right near the starter, I had taken the canister off to do the starter, and now the canister is back in place. I did that right before I did the torque converter. It's right there. Here's the canister. Make sure I put those vacuum hoses back on there good. So again, this is what I'm using to put the bolts in. I'm kind of worried about dropping one down in that bell housing, but this seemed to work the first time for the first bolt, so I'm going to continue with this. Kind of turn it, and then you could feel the magnet, feel the bolt grab. Then I was actually ever turn it on by hand after that. So I decided to mount the cross member bracket for the this is upside down, sorry. Okay, so now it's right, but I decided to mount this on the transfer case first before I put it under the car. Okay, so it wasn't the easiest thing in the world, but I got underneath it the transfer case and just kind of manhandled it up there and stuck it on the output shaft by hand. I was thinking about using my ratchet straps to kind of ratchet it up, but I was able to pick it up and kind of press it up, to bench press that thing up there and get it on the output shaft. Now I got to get my bolts in and lined up. So again, there's 6 bolts in here. There's a long one here, short one in that hole right there. Up top, there's one on this side, and then there's 3 down this side over here. There's one on top. There's one on top on this side, and then there's 2 on the back side. So there's 6 holding this transfer case together. Now I'm going to jack up the lift, jack up the transmission to the chassis and bolt this member across. And then I don't want to forget to tighten up the bolt in here also. I just have it a little bit loose right now. So the next thing I did was went back and hooked my cables up here to the transfer case. And I need to tie this up out of the way right here, because that's not going to be good if it gets caught on something. Okay, so now reinstalling the front drive shaft, lining that up, making sure I can turn the drive shaft. Right now I have all the wheels off the ground, reattaching the bolts for the front drive shaft. Okay, so I just put back the rear drive shaft. So again, I was interrupted by a FaceTime call, but there's 3 bolts here. I put those in already. I actually installed the center support bracket and bearing first to hold it up there. Just installed the nuts by hand, and then I'll put the bolts back here for the rear drive shaft. And so I've just finished putting it in. Now I believe I've got to go back with the shields, the heat shields next. And so next, before the heat shields, I'm going to put the bolt back in for the transmission lines. There's one bolt that goes in there. I'm going to put that back first. Getting ready to put the muffler back in. I'm using these ratchet straps to kind of help suspend the muffler while I'm bolting it in. See how that goes, but now the muffler's going back in. The thing to put on is the shifter cable. This shifting rod goes through the hole here on this bracket. Before I tighten that, I'm gonna mount this bracket back to the transmission there. So today, all I've got left to do is put in transmission fluid here. This is what I'm using. Put in red can. You have that little siphon pump. So I put everything in here a quarter at a time and put that into the car. Before I do that though, I'll probably go ahead and put on this metal plate here, and then also put on this shield as well eventually under the car. I might have to do that after a test drive, and then hopefully everything will come together. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks.
Yeah.